Hello and welcome to the Popcorn Junkies. Sometimes when we have to see films, review films, tell you about films, sometimes we have to go on mercy missions. Sometimes we have to sacrifice ourselves for the greater cause of whether you guys should actually waste your time going to see something that everyone is going mad about. And it's really hard to read between the lines and get right in there and work out whether this is something worth seeing, or whether it's something around which there's a load of hype, or whether in fact there's actually something there worth checking out. And that leads us to the fact that this is a review of It Ends With Us. If you haven't seen a meme or a social media clip or a TikTok clip or a press story about the alleged falling out between Blake Lively, she who is a fabulous actress. I mean, I can't think of men. I literally, there was that shark film, Stranded, was she? Stranded? Castaway, something? She was in the sea. Obviously, she's the partner of Ryan Reynolds. And it's curious that Deadpool and Wolverine came out pretty much a week, or was it 10 days before It Ends With Us. So we've seen a lot of them out and about. But one of the big stories that's kind of emerged from this film is the alleged, as I say, falling out between Blake Lively and the director and her co-star in this film, Justin Baldoni. Now, a whole heap of kind of the press coverage, the social media, clickbait, the gossip and all that kind of stuff immediately turned me off this as a prospect. And I have to confess, this isn't the kind of film, a romantic drama that I would necessarily be drawn to in the first place anyway. I sort of had this hunch that this was a Netflix film, a sort of Netflix rom-com. And I have to say something about the press and publicity and the way in which the tone of the kind of coverage has kind of spilled out ahead of this film for me, because I thought this was going to be a bright and breezy and slightly fluffy and fizzy kind of film about romance, which has a dark side to it. I know it has a dark side to it. It's based on the book by Colleen Hoover. I think our kids read it and they weren't that impressed with the book, but it's a story which nibbles at the edges. Well, it doesn't nibble at the edges really. It's threaded through with the topic of domestic violence and the boundaries therein within a relationship, and what one should tolerate, shouldn't tolerate, etc., etc. And so it was confusing to me that we were getting this conflict between Justin Baldoni. We posted a couple of stories about it, YouTube shorts about it, and Blake Lively. What's all that about? Why have they fallen out? Is there a sort of clash of creative visions and all this kind of stuff? And what I did notice as I read into it a little bit more, which made me think, I'm going to go and see this for you guys, but also to see what all the fuss is about. What I also discovered about it is that really Blake Lively's press push for this was inherently much fluffier and sort of social media friendly and lighter toned. Not than Justin Baldoni's, but maybe than the film necessarily should have had. A little bit more about that in a minute, because this is a film, It Ends With Us. What I'm going to say right now is it's a film that surprised me. It was also incredibly predictable in a lot of the ways I thought it could be, but it was also quite surprising. So this is about Lily Bloom, a young woman who essentially, the film starts with the death of her father, and quite quickly it unravels that she has a sort of troubled, or had a troubled relationship with him, or she's her relationship with him, her remembrance of him and her love of him is troubled because she struggles to even write down 5 things that she likes about him at his funeral. It then transpires quite quickly at the beginning of this film that he was a domestic abuser, and so we have sort of flashbacks and clips of him beating up her mother. When I went in to see this, I was thinking this is going to be a syrupy, rom-com-y kind of, not particularly deep kind of film. But quite quickly it's shown to us that there's, this woman is the child of a domestic abuser, essentially. And so we have that, so that's established. And then in her sort of, she's mourning, she's going through grief, and many of the kind of, junctions and moments and situations in the script where things happen are perhaps the most cliched parts of this film. So on a rooftop, on a building, which happens to be where Justin Baldoni's character, who is a neurosurgeon, where he lives, she happens to be sat having a cigarette, looking over the skyline of Boston, is it? And sort of contemplating her life. She's not going to kill herself, but contemplating her life, contemplating, I presume, her dad. And she's in grief. And they connect. Now, here's the thing. So this scene happens quite early on in the film. He sort of blazes into or onto the rooftop, kicking a chair and smashing a door. and then goes into the charm personified. He becomes the love bomber. It's the charm syndrome. You know, he's got all eyes for her. He's incredibly forward. He kind of not just love bomb. Well, he doesn't love bomb her. He lust bombs her. He says that no woman's ever said no to him. And quite quickly, we are into a very intense, almost kind of, you know, pickup situation where she's kind of said, no, I'm not going to sleep with you, but romance and sizzle and fizzle and kicks in. And here's the thing, this is really short. I try to be really honest with my reviews. This first scene, who was the screenplay? The screenplay was written by Christy Hall. This first scene where they were both opposite each other, flirting, parrying, sort of, you know, shadow boxing. He was pushing a bit forward. She was playing hard to get. He was playing not hard to get and all that kind of stuff. I've got to say it. It was brilliantly written. It was incredibly watchable. They performed it really, really naturally and believably and really sort of economically. And I kind of got caught in. And I think that's an important thing to say right at the outset here, because this is a nicely written film which struggles, I think, and is kind of creaking beneath a really confused PR push for what feels like was perhaps a different film. This is a clearly mainstream, slightly Taylor Swiftian kind of appealing. I mean, she's on the soundtrack. I think Blake Lively's a friend of hers, isn't she? This is very much aimed at a sort of mainstream audience. But within that, this isn't a stupid, shallow film. And I was expecting it to be stupid and shallow. What I think is stupid and shallow about this film has been the press and the publicity machine after it hasn't spoken to what I think are actually some of this film's really quite strong attributes. Let's talk about performances. Blake Lively, incredibly watchable, incredibly believable. Justin Baldoni, incredibly charismatic, incredibly threatening and yet alluring. I mean, that's a difficult balancing act to get, isn't it? The fact that you can see the attraction, but you're not sort of screaming, just get away from him. He's not out and out nasty. He has a backstory, we discover further down the way, a tragedy that's happened in his life, which is in no way does this film seek to justify what happens later in the film. He has a lovely sister. Where this film struggles is in what I would say the syrupy story. The script and the dialogue is really neat. It's really nice. It's really authentic, and it's really watchable and digestible. And you're like, oh wow, yeah, this is great. I mean, all of them. I mean, all the actors. But it's the story beat points that felt kind of syrupy, and I haven't read the book, so I'm not too sure if they kind of lift from that. So the idea that she's called Lily Bloom and she wants to open a flower shop, and so she opens a flower shop, and then the coincidence that a woman walks in who wants to work for her in the flower shop happens to be the sister-in-law. No, sister, maybe the sister, I can't remember, of the guy she's met on the rooftop, Justin Baldoni. So the coincidences are a bit too obvious. We have one set of flashbacks where we cut back to a much younger Blake Lively, or Lily Bloom, and she strikes up in her younger years this relationship with this essentially what they call a homeless dude, but we discover he's run away from home. We discover he was going to kill himself. We discover that he too, I think, has seen scenes of domestic abuse, and so there's that connection between the two of them. And so we cut back to these earlier iterations of Lily Bloom's, of Blake Lively's character when she was younger, having this relationship, and again that relationship with that boy, which comes back up later in the film. The coincidences around that, the serendipity around that's all the eggy stuff. So it was hard to get on board with the setups. It was hard to get on board with the individual conceits. But once you kind of let go of them and just went, oh, okay, all right, well, blimey, it's the same woman. She's related to the guy she's had a fling with. She's working in the shop. She had a fling with this guy who was sort of like homeless when she was younger. She bumps into him again when she's older, when she's now going out with Justin Baldoni and all this kind of stuff. All these coincidences. I mean, they're obviously there to kind of drive the story along. They were creaky. They were cliched. They were hackneyed. But what I have to say is huge shout out to the entire cast, because they all absolutely act their socks off in so far as, not necessarily overacting, but, they make you forget the aching kind of hackneyedness of how we've got into these scenes, so that when you're in the individual scenes, you really buy into them and you really go with the story. And what this film then ends up being able to do, which is quite nifty and quite clever, is that we have 1, 2, 3 moments of essentially aggression and aggravation between Justin Baldoni and Lily Bloom's character, Blake Lively's character. They get it on, they get together, they get married, eventually, and it's and there are a few kind of red flags there. Even his sister says, I don't know whether you should be going out with him, even though I love him, even though I'm related. I don't know if you should go out with him. He's a bit, he runs through women really quickly, all that kind of stuff. But what's nice about it, what's clever, not nice, but what's clever about this film is in those moments of essentially domestic abuse, they're presented the first time we see each of them. One is a moment where he drops something at the fridge and she gets accidentally knocked. The other is where he's trying to he's struggling with her as she runs away and she accidentally falls down the stairs. And the last one is she sort of accidentally falls back onto a couch. And what's interesting about each of those situations is the first time we get presented them, it's accidentally, and we are left in the position of Lily Bloom, Blake Lively's character, thinking, oh no, this happened because it was an accident. This didn't really happen because it was malicious. This wasn't something horrible or intended. And so the film does quite a clever thing. It's not innovatively directed. It doesn't do anything clever to achieve this. But when it shows us the moments, the key pinch points of essentially the sort of early stages of a domestic abusive relationship, when we experience them for the first time, we see them and feel them as relatively innocent. And then it's only further down the way as she starts to reflect on this and looks back upon the conditions in which they happen, that you then realise that they were potentially, and in fact were, more malicious. And so this film pulls off something that I didn't think you could really pull off, which is making a mainstream, digestible, well-acted film about the perils of domestic abuse, about the ways in which you need to get out of it quickly and deal with it quite speedily so that it doesn't get any worse, whilst at the same time acknowledging that the reason for the bloke being like this often comes from his own trauma, his own issues, stuff going on in his life, but it goes to great lengths not to excuse him. He doesn't get the woman at the end. She gets pregnant, and there's an incredibly powerful scene where she talks to him about, what would you say to our daughter if this was you, if she came back to you as her father and said this is what her partner had done to him, and then she runs through, or done to her, and then she runs through the things that he'd done to her. So you get this great moment of, you don't see the relationship brought together, you don't see her tolerating it, you also see her calling him out, and you don't see an obvious kind of villainizing. Justin Baldoni's character isn't just villainized and dismissed and rubbished and then thrown away. He also, isn't at the level that her father was. But that's where I think this film's clever. And I saw this film and I thought, I have to say, a big shout out to Justin Baldoni. I thought he was brilliant. I thought he played it fantastically. He was right on the edge of troubled, sinister, controlling, overly charming, but also genuinely charming and desirable. You got it, you saw it. The young guy, the homeless boy that she had the fling with when she bumps back into him in Boston, brilliantly, beautifully played by, who is it? Brandon Sklenar. I've not seen him before. He looks like he's Ryan Gosling's long lost brother. Incredibly good, incredibly nuanced, incredibly layered, and an incredibly tender scene from Justin Baldoni's sister when, the violence has happened, when they've split up, when Blake Lively's character Lily Bloom has decided this isn't the right relationship for her. She needs to protect herself. She needs to protect her daughter. A really complicated, difficult emotional scene for Jenny Slate to play as Justin Baldoni's sister, to say, look, this is where he came from. This is what happened to him. And spoiler alert, you discover that he was involved in a tragic accident shooting his brother with what he thought was a toy gun, but a real gun. This happens a lot in America, actually, sort of infant killings at the hand of guns. And so you are given not a justification, but an explanation. And you are also given, in Blake Lively's character, a sort of strong and sort of gracious kind of character who they cleverly, I think Justin Baldoni as the director, cleverly puts us in her point of view so that we are sort of ourselves questioning, did he really mean anything there? Did he really do anything too badly there? And it was only upon the kind of revisit of the clips, and then you see them done in a much more sort of obviously aggressive fashion, that you think, oh my God, so there was more of a kind of malicious intent in there. What I would say is this is an incredibly well-written, but badly plotted, or obviously plotted, and at times sort of toe-curlingly sort of cliched in its attempt to ask you to think, oh, well, he would have walked into this bar. There's a moment where, they go to their favourite bar in Boston, or restaurant in Boston, and it happens to be owned and run by the guy that she was sleeping with, who was homeless when she was younger. And then, of course, he sees that there's a bruise on her when she comes to visit with Justin Baldoni one night, and he's like, you've got to leave him, and all this kind of stuff. And then a fight breaks out there. A couple of moments like that, really bad beat points there. But what I would say about this film is, it's nowhere near as bad as I thought it was going to be. But the press and publicity and everything around it is totally kind of throws away the strength of the film's message. Because I think what this film does manage to do in its sort of, and don't get me wrong, everyone in it is beautiful. Everywhere in it is beautiful. Her flower shop is stunning. It's all Instagram real. I mean, I wouldn't, it would have felt right if he'd shot the entire film in portrait, high res, and that we were sort of watching it on Instagram, because the whole thing had a sort of was sort of coated and dripping with a sort of influencer wealth, if you like, and an influencer kind of sheen and polish, which again, in a weird way, speaks to the kind of press and publicity that this film has had. That sort of tugged against slightly the darkness. There's a lot of darkness in this film. And it manages to kind of deliver that, but it kind of also, at the same time, manages to deliver you something that's almost aspirational. And so I think if there's a danger with this film in the fact that it's so polished, and then the press and publicity machine has made it seem so, oh, it's fun, it's kind of this, it's that, is that could it minimise the message at the heart? Because the message at the heart of it and the narrative end of this film is strong, and there's a good point to it, and it says it doesn't matter who you are, what class of person you are. Domestic violence can hide behind the most affluent, the most, if you like, influencer, the most sort of, Instagrammable versus reality type world. And I think that's a nice point to have, but it's very unrelatable. It's very easy on the eye. Everyone's beautiful, everyone's stunning to look at. You get a real sense of Boston, all that kind of stuff. So it's a really curious film, and I'm just saying, I was surprised. So I went to see it so that you didn't have to. But what I would say to you is, go and see it, because every single performance in it is brilliant. Really is, really good, heartfelt. I think the actors do a great job. The script is really wonderful between those intense, one-on-one kind of relationship scenes and all that kind of stuff. Really good stuff. But it's the signposting and the linking between scenes, and even the flashbacks, I suppose, were a little bit trite and a little bit cliched. So if I was to score this, I would give this, surprisingly, 69 out of 100.